with us forever and ever and ever.
Okay, all. I got a really strange story for everyone today. Here in my hometown, not too far from where I live, there is a park called Sawyer Park. It looks pretty normal at first glance. A playground, disc golf, a stream, and a wooded area surrounding it. All pretty normal and standard park things. The weird part is, there are a few small buildings in this park. They are abandoned though. They aren't used for anything. Not meeting places, community centers, party venues, nothing. Just empty buildings. Now everyone who lives here knows what those buildings used to be. Brace yourself, this is where it gets insanely creepy. Sawyer Park used to be a sanitarium. Yeah, you heard that right. It was a hospital, and a pretty shady one at that. It housed tuberculosis patients, and then later, mental patients. Apparently, the patients weren't treated all that well during their time there. The fact that a pretty seemingly unassuming park having a creepy backstory really intrigued me, so, of course, I thought the best idea was to gather some friends and go out there at night to see if anything weird happened. Spoiler alert, it did. So, I kind of consider myself an amateur paranormal investigator, so I thought this would be no big deal. I've been to plenty of paranormal and weird locations. The first thing I realized about Sawyer Park, though, is that its vibe was completely off. During the day, it was mildly unsettling, but at night, the energy just seemed sinister. I rarely get scared, but here I was, really creeped out. But I wasn't going to wimp out, especially since I was the one who suggested to check it out at night in the first place. After about 10 minutes of things being pretty uneventful other than some rustling in the bushes, which, to be fair, could have been wind or some wild animals, we decided to split up into groups of 2 or 3. I grouped up with my boyfriend and my best friend. We were feeling brave and headed straight for the building closest to the woods. Once there, I was feeling really uneasy. I was really nauseous, which I at first shook off as nerves. While looking around, I started to hear coughing. Not too noticeable at first, but it occasionally got louder and more frequent. The thing was, no one in my group had a cough, and they heard it too. We looked all around, thinking it was a friend of ours pranking us. No one was there. The coughing stopped for a bit, and we continued our exploration. It came back, this time louder. It was a pretty nasty hacking cough too. We decided to explore the inside of the building. There was a broken window that hadn't been fixed that we could fit through. Nothing happened for a bit, but behind the door, I heard the coughing again. I motioned to my friends to be quiet and I opened the door. The coughing was definitely coming from that room, but there was no one in there. In the corner, I noticed a chair. Suddenly, the chair started moving, slowly. We ran out of there and went straight to the car. Luckily, our other friends also got scared by whatever and were waiting for us out of the car, and we sped away. I still haven't gone back to Sawyer Park since then, not even during the day. I'd never heard or seen such clear evidence before. It is definitely haunted by some of its old patients. Back when Pokemon Go came out, my boyfriend and I would go for Poke walks around the neighborhood. normally at night since we both worked crazy retail shifts, but normally back home by midnight. This happened probably about a year ago to the day. Where I used to live had a massive golf course and surrounding parks, sort of scattered in the built-up suburban area. What's sort of relevant is that the golf course was a nest in Pokemon Go, so we naturally beelined there on our walks. This time we went a little bit different, going instead to one of the little parks I mentioned. It was dark, but there's plenty of streetlights. We got onto the field and there was a Pokestop in the map, but when I looked to where it was pitch black. As I watched, the streetlight closest to the blackness went out, and the next one. I had the absolute worst feeling of utter terror and dread in my stomach. My boyfriend was pushing to walk to the stop, but I couldn't move. I was terrified to my core of that dark place. And I'm not scared of the dark. And I just refused. I can't accurately portray the fear, but as close as I can is that I knew something awful would happen if we went into the dark. I didn't feel better until literal streets away, and I felt like we were followed for a while. Since then, I've been scouring the news for attacks, murders, rapes in that area, and I've got nothing. I recall Ted Bundy saying that the closest he got to being caught was a similar situation, where a man actually trod on the body, got spooked and booked it. I'm still thinking about it today, and I have no idea what it could be, or why. Something that might also be relevant is that, since I moved out of the area, I've had no other paranormal experiences except for the resident ghost in my dad's house. He's called someone once mentioned on one of my posts that I could be more sensitive to paranormal and ghostly goings-on, and I think that may be true. But right now, I'm just wondering what you all think happened here. I can't stop thinking about it, and sometimes I see the pitch black end of the park in my dreams. It's unsettling. A girl and I witnessed something weird in a playground. One dark night at around 3 a.m., my friend Emily and I shared a cigarette on her front porch. We faced an old community playground that was built just across the street from her apartment. The night had completely engulfed the small park, and only a few streetlights dimly lit the edges. Trees surrounded the perimeter, and in its center were aging wooden structures for kids to play on. The air was already a bit eerie, but it suddenly took a turn when we heard a voice come from the darkness. It was soft enough that I couldn't understand it, but Emily and I both agreed that someone was speaking from the structures. Soon, we heard a reply, and then maybe a third, until at least 3 distinguishable adult male voices were quietly conversing in the middle of the night. And this is when it gets weirder. The voices soon came to a halt, and then Emily and I both witnessed a flashlight turn on and start looking around the playground floor. The light illuminated the ground around them, but we couldn't distinguish any physical characteristics. We heard some footsteps as they were walking in and around the structures, but other than that, they were in silence. Soon after, a second flashlight turned on. Next, a third, then a fourth, until one by one, a total of 8 or 9 different flashlights were suddenly lit and roaming the playground. Their steps grew louder as they paced across the wood chips. The lights that turned on were maybe 10 to 15 feet apart from another. So it wasn't like people huddled, turned on their flashlights and then spread out. It seemed like they were already planted in separate places at the start. Soon after, they all stopped, all at once. No more footsteps, no more lights, no more voices. It was like they all completely vanished. We were mind blown. All of this happened in like 2 minutes or less. We finished our cigarette and stayed outside a bit longer. No one seemed to enter or exit the playground. We saw no cars turn on or go by. We quietly listened for more footsteps or voices, but there was nothing. We both recounted what we saw and confirmed that it couldn't have been a hallucination. It really happened. To this day, I have no explanation. Okay, so I live in a pretty rural place. The school here only has 300 to 350-ish kids in total. There is a playground behind the school and a public complex across the street. My friends and I used to hang out at this complex after school a lot. One day we stayed and decided we would go for a walk around our little town. So we did. We like walking trails in the town, so we took all the trails around the school and the complex. It was around 6 o'clock at night and the sun was starting to go down. We were walking up a hill to go back to the complex and stay there for a little while longer. But as we were walking up the hill, one of the streetlights just turned off. We thought, okay, well, maybe the battery ran out or something, because the rest of the streetlights around that one were still on. We didn't think much of it. We decided to go hang out on the playground behind the school for a while, just to chill and talk. We were 16, 17-year-olds at this time, so we weren't really going to play on the playground. We sat on one of the big playground sets. It has 2 levels to it. We were on the top level. There were 3 of us. We sat there and played a little game of sharing secrets with each other, just to pass the time until we went home. We then felt something jiggle to the whole playground set we were sitting on. We all hopped up very fast. I thought it was one of our other friends down below us, moving the equipment back and forth, although it was only 3 of us there that night. But I looked down and didn't see anything. Then we saw a soccer ball rolling away from us on the ground. There was no wind or anything, and even if there was, we were between a school and the forest. I think that would have blocked the wind. Maybe 40 seconds later, we were still just standing there, stunned at what had just happened. Then, we heard something that sounded like a dumpster being slammed shut behind us in the forest. We thought maybe someone threw the soccer ball at the playground equipment, but I then called out and nobody answered. We went down and searched around, and there was nothing and nobody anywhere but us. After that, we walked fast out of the playground and back to the complex and waited until 8. That's when we left and went home. This moment was probably the scariest thing to happen to me yet in my life. My friends and I from that night talk about that night sometimes, and we still have no idea what could have made that soccer ball be thrown at the playground equipment. So, to preface this story, I was about 15 to 16 years old at the time. It was my best friend's birthday, and she had invited about 6 of us over to her place to play a few games, such as Mario Party, Mario Kart, Guitar Hero, etc., and stay the night in celebration of her big 16. So at this get-together, there was 5 girls, including me, and 1 boy. After a while, my best friend asked if we would like to go to the playground, which was about a 10-minute walk away from her house. Of course, being stupid teens, we agreed, not thinking of how it may be dangerous, since the majority of us were young girls, and it was currently 10 p.m. Anyways, we walked down to this park and continued playing Grounders when we arrived, which, if you don't know, is a game commonly played in elementary schools. The rules are, 1 person is it, The person who is it must close their eyes and try to seek the other players as they hide on playground equipment in order to tag them. But there's a catch. If someone gets off the equipment and the person who's it calls grounders while they're on the ground, they are then tagged. Yeah, I know it's a pretty childish game, but it's fun. After a few rounds, we got bored and decided to huddle around in a circle in the center of the playground equipment. We were just talking, joking around, when suddenly I heard what I thought to be something like rocks hitting the chain link fence that resided on the back of the playground. I hushed the group, looked over at my best friend, asking if she heard that too, as everyone looked at me like I had 10 heads. She asked me what I meant, and when I told her it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the fence behind us, she responded with the classic, "Ooh, it's a murderer coming to get us." Naturally, I glared at her, flipping her off. She knows I get paranoid sometimes, but I have a very good intuition, and something just felt off. A few minutes later, after some more rocks were thrown at the fence, and I obsessively stared down the area behind the fence in paranoia, which was all woods besides the houses on the left and right of the playground, I noticed a light weaving its way through the branches of the trees. At first, I thought maybe it was just a headlight of a car that was coming down the street that connected the street of the park, since you can vaguely see headlights of oncoming traffic through them. But I soon realized there was only one light, and it was bouncing up and down like it was being held by someone who was walking. I quickly pointed it out to the group around me as we all snapped our heads over in the direction. Coming up along the side of the nearby house on the left side of the park was a man who wore a hat, some white, baggy and dirty sweatpants, and a black coat. He was holding a flashlight, not the one on your phone, but an actual flashlight. He was too far away to guess his age, even when he sat on the swings closer to the playground equipment we were on. But we all collectively agreed it was strange, since he seemed to be in at least his mid-20s, I guess from his clothes. And he just came out of the woods by himself to sit and stare at a load of kids. After a brief discussion, we agreed that maybe he was waiting for a ride, or was just resting for a moment. So we tried to brush off the fact he was sitting and was so intensely staring at us. However, we started to take note that after a few minutes of us resuming our very competitive game of grounders, that this stranger was slowly inching his way closer to the group. He went from sitting on the one swing furthest away to the next swing, a bit closer to the equipment we were on, to the next, until he was about 10 feet away from our game. The whole time he just sat there, watching. At this point, all of us had noticed the strange man attempting to get closer to us, and in an attempt to remove ourselves from a potentially dangerous situation, we made a group decision to leave. Getting up, we all piled off the playground equipment, and in pairs of 2, we walked down the stairs on the further side, away from the creepy man. As we attempted to casually walk away, I kept my eyes glued to his figure, and as we neared the end of the street, he got up. Slowly at first, the man started to trail behind us, keeping his distance. I decided to keep my mouth shut at the time because we were about to make a turn. I thought that if he continues to follow us instead of going the other way, I'd bring it up to the others. And wouldn't you know it, the creep stays hot on our heels, not only following which turn we took, but also starting sprinting towards us, screaming,
"You motherfuckers, I'll fucking kill you."
At this point, the whole group bursts out into a sprint. The adrenaline I felt made me run so fast I was ahead of everyone else. Everyone was urging each other to run. I didn't even take a second to see if the others were behind me. That was, until I heard my best friend struggling to run. She has pretty bad asthma. I instantly felt horrible for running off on her, So I ran back to her side, grabbing her hand and quite literally dragging her along, repeating things like, "Deep breaths, you got this. Come on, we have to go now." This whole time the man was still running, screaming behind us, and was catching up quickly. At this point, both me and another girl in the group took it upon ourselves to get my best friend moving as fast as possible, both taking a hand and running at a pace she could keep. Luckily, this park was only about a 10-minute walk from my friend's house, and as we all piled in through her garage door, I turned to see this delusional man start running up her driveway. He got about halfway until our big fluffy savior ran to the open door. My friend's 100-pound, fully grown German shepherd. She lurched at the man, barking as we gripped her collar in an attempt to keep her from running completely after the man. Luckily, her sudden and loud appearance caused the man to freeze in fear before running away down the dark, lamplit street. We were terrified for the rest of the night and only managed to sleep after putting random items next to us. We even had a rake. But the most comforting, our big, fluffy hero, just in case the creep decided to come back. So, to the crazy creep who enjoys watching kids at the park, then chasing them home, let's not meet again. At the time this happened, I was 13. I'm female. So this happened 2 years ago and I was fairly naive. I was a major introvert, only friends with a few people in my class. I wanted to be social, but I preferred to be alone and read or write. Classic nerd things. In early November, I got a text on my phone that was from a few classmates whose phone numbers I had, and around one or two I couldn't recognize. It was a group chat, asking if we wanted to hang out at night near the park at our school. My parents, being strict and paranoid, would never let me go. Luckily, or what I thought was luck, they were heading out for an overnight trip. They would be back around 4 in the morning. Everything fell into place. Once my parents left around 8ish, I ran out the door and made my way to the park. The one thing I made sure to do was lock the door. My parents were paranoid after all, and it was their biggest thing that they had ingrained into me. Once I arrived at the park, I noticed a creepy figure near the edge of the woods. No one else seemed to notice it, and I already had enough reputation as a weirdo who was true crime obsessed, so I didn't mention it. As the night drew on and on, I was having the time of my life, ignoring the gut feeling I had telling me to run. Every so often I would look over my shoulder, and the man would still be standing there. Around 9:45, 4 out of the 10 people there had to leave due to their curfew. It was getting cold and was nearly pitch black with a few streetlights every so often. The rest of us decided to go as well, since it felt more eerie and quiet. The place we were hanging out at was a field that was fenced in with a few exits and entrances. A large, wide fence with a small park in the back and our giant middle school behind us. The front of the field faced the empty road, and the right and left sides were surrounded by forest. All of the people left were getting picked up by cars, meaning they went the opposite way to the road since that's where the parking lot was. The man stood by the right forest road exit. The man stood by the right side road exit that I needed to take to get home. I walked away from my group and tried to steady my heavy breathing. I didn't want to be paranoid, but all the true crime I listened to was catching up to me. The man was probably early 40s, late 30s, dark hair with a beard. He was probably around 5'9", but at the time, it seemed like he was 6 foot. He stood about 10 feet from the exit I had to take, so when I got close enough to it, I ran for about 30 feet through the exit and through the woods. Once I felt safe enough, I started just to quickly walk through the woods, or at least get to the road. I heard a snap and a crunch from behind me. I stopped walking for a second and quickly checked over my shoulder. Around 15 feet behind me stood the very same man. He was walking slowly behind me, almost as if he was trying not to be suspicious, but it only made my fear worse. I turned around and walked so quickly, I was basically jogging. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park we had hung out at, and I wasn't athletic enough to run home. After around 7 minutes of walking fast, I was in my neighborhood. I knew that I could run to my house if I had to, so I checked to see if he was still trailing behind me. To my horror, he was only 5 feet away. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever ran. I could hear his footsteps behind me, thumping across the concrete as he ran too. I dove down an alleyway I knew well and tried to lose him in a park, making my way home longer. I could hear his heavy breath, followed by his footsteps as he tried to keep up. I cut through houses, backyards and front yards. I finally made it to my house and flew up the steps. I looked behind me and he had just arrived at the bottom of my stairs. I unlocked the door and burst through it, shoving it closed behind me, and I heard him hit the door with his whole body. I ran around the house and locked all the windows, turned off the lights, and hid in my bedroom with the kitchen knife, just in case he got in. He didn't, luckily. If this was a better world, that's where my story would end. But it doesn't. After a few months, I hadn't really told anyone what happened since I don't want to get in trouble with my parents for sneaking out or anything. I didn't go out with anyone or any group anymore, and my loner status returned. I began to write horror stories as a coping mechanism and never went out past 7. It was around February when a classmate of mine was sharing a story of some random man following her home on the bus. She described him almost the exact same as the man who had chased me home. Another girl mentioned that he sounded like the guy who stood outside the school and tried to follow her home. I didn't join in, but everyone agreed that he was just a weird guy. He was kind of forgotten, and eventually I moved on too. Around May, I was getting ready to walk to school when my mum pulled me aside and showed me a picture of a man, the guy who stalked me actually. She told me that he had been arrested 2 weeks ago for sexually assaulting a child and had escaped last night. She told me to keep an eye out for him and to call the cops if I saw him. I was shaking the whole time I walked to school. It haunts me to know that if he had caught me, I would most likely be in her position or even dead. So, creepy nighttime stalker who liked to hunt down young girls and sexually assault them, let's not meet again.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.